Hi and welcome everyone to today's interview or conversation about spiritual feminism or feminist spirituality. We already had, my guest and I, a beautiful little chat about that. It's interesting that you can see it from one side or from the other, and we will dive into that, what it means for us in a little bit. But first, I want to extend a warm welcome to Leila Madeline. And as a beginning, I do that on as many conversations I remember to do it. I would invite you for a cycle check-in. So stating the date of the day of your cycle that you're on, and 1, 2, or 3 words that describe how you are on this day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation to drop into the body before we go into the mind and start talking. I'm on day 23 of my cycle today, and I am feeling raw, I am feeling tender, and I am feeling volatile today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which kind of fits to the autumn energy of that phase. And for everyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, I do have resources on my website where you can find out what it all means. For me, I am on my day 26. So I am also in my inner autumn or luteal phase. And I feel powerful, too much, which is an interesting thing to feel. But also grateful for all the opportunities I get speaking to people from all over the world. You're in Australia, I'm in Germany. The magic of the internet. It's so cool. So yeah, to lead us into this conversation, would you maybe like to share your take on feminist spirituality?
Yeah, for sure. I would love to. Feminist spirituality to me, my spiritual practice is very feminine based. First of all, it's very like somatic, very down in the body, very of the earth, very cyclical. And to me, bringing in the feminist piece into spirituality is not bypassing the wounding of our culture within our spiritual practices, because I think there's so much potency and so much beauty in embracing the feminine principle as a spiritual practice. But even that in itself is an act of, it's activist, right? It's an activist act to do that. It's very feminist, because we live in a world, like even in spiritual spaces, where like going up into the mind and going into it's kind of bypassing, almost like going into this like rationalizing and logicking ourselves out of everything, and constantly practicing gratitude and visualizing, manifesting, like ascending. There's a real culture of ascending upwards towards the mind and towards the higher, quote unquote, higher realms, right? But when we bring in this feminine principle, we're calling in the descent, saying that there is no like new earth. We're saying that the earth is now, the earth is here. There is no like birthing the new earth or heaven on earth. It's now, it's here. It's in our cells, it's in our matter, it's in our wombs, it's in the earth and the mud and the muck, So calling this descent, even that to me, it feels really radical, I mean, it's old, it's ancient, of course, but it's a remembrance of something that was sacred and something that our world really needs right now. So that as a spiritual practice is beautiful, but to make it feminist, to me, means consciously and intentionally bringing in the awareness of this oppression, I suppose, this dissuading away from the feminine path, even within spiritual spaces, because of patriarchal capitalist culture. That to me is what feminist spirituality is.
So cool. And I totally am on board with you on all of that. It's just interesting that I always talk about, or like, I don't talk much about it, but I have always in my mind talked about it as spiritual feminism. But actually it's for me the same thing. It's this an earth-based spirituality that works with the cycle, and that by attuning to our own rhythm, we kind of disrupt all these systems that have been put in place to kind of get us out of the body in the first place. And that we need to turn inwards to our inner wisdom. And I've even started to, because there's like, you have to go to the next level, or even I sometimes, because I see life as a spiral, and I do believe you agree on that we are constantly walking these spirals of our life. And I'm consciously reminding myself to say a spiral deeper and not the next level, a spiral higher, because to me, it's, as you say, it's this descent into ourselves, which is hard to keep up in a world that wants us to be outward and happy and put a smile on your face and be in spring and in summer and never rest. And as you say, it's the act itself to attune to our own, to get into the body, to attune to our own rhythm, is activist in nature. And so thank you for saying it.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for asking the question. And I think as well, it's really important to know that with a lot of ascension-based practices, a lot of like, you know, visualizing and getting out of the body kind of practices, it's very hierarchical, which by its nature will encode a lot of shame. Because if we're always trying to, as you say, get to the next, get to the next level and move up to the next rung on our spiritual journey, then we have to shame what is below us, both in ourselves and in other people. So embracing this more cyclical way of looking at the world, it just dissolves that hierarchical structure that even exists within a lot of spiritual spaces. That's a big part of it for me too, is just dissolving the shame, just like unshaming where we are right now and embracing all of it, because this is part of our human experience.
Yes to that. And interesting, I've never thought about visualization like that, because that's just not, this hierarchical thing is just not me. So I haven't even realized that it can have this tendency. For me, it's all about finding the visuals that are already existent within you, and not like kind of, I don't want to say imagining, but it is sometimes making things up, or feeling bad when you aren't able to visualize, just because you are not a visual person, because not everybody is a visual person. Some are more auditive, or some just know things, or some just feel things. And then you might have a harder time doing a quote unquote visualization.
Yeah, for sure. And this isn't to say at all that like visualization practices, like by and large, are a bad idea. Like I'm a big fan of them, but when we're using them as like kind of in like as a self-soothing mechanism, but to the point of like an addictive pattern, like an escapism, you know, like when it's used as escapism, it's like, let's get up out of our experience right now and get into this visualized, imagined version, this projected version of self that doesn't exist here in this world. It's up here. You know, like for me, the point of a visualization practice is to bring whatever we see here down. It's again the descent. It's not about taking us up to here. It's about bringing whatever that is back down through the body.
Yeah, beautiful. And one thing that also just popped into my mind is that it's about, we have lived in these oppressive structures for all our life, because they have just existed for the past 5,000 years. And so part of my spiritual practice and feminist practice is to understand where I run the same patterns that are keeping them alive outside of me, and addressing them within me first, because that's the only thing I have control over, and the only thing that to me makes sense to start with.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yes.
Wow, so we are deep in the topic, but maybe would you like to share how you came into this whole topic and realm, spirituality and feminism?
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. Well, I've been a philosopher for all of my life. Like since I was about maybe 8 or 9 years old, I've been studying a lot of, global philosophies. And that's what kind of got me into the feminism when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I could already sense there was something a little bit off with the way that our history is recorded, with the way that our thoughts are prioritized, with the way different belief systems are superimposed over a culture. And yeah, and then that kind of expanded through my youth. I did quite a lot of like fairly hardcore activism type stuff in my youth around particularly like environmental based stuff, because that to me is a big part of feminism as well. Like the intersectional eco-feminist aspect is bringing in all of life and all of the earth as well. And yeah, then when I moved to Sydney from the small town where I grew up, I started working in feminist not-for-profits. I was a campaigner for about 7 years, and I worked really, really hard. I burnt myself out massively, and I was working maybe 50, 60-hour weeks. It was really fulfilling and really rewarding work. But I think that many activists come to a point of burnout, exhaustion, collapse, and resentment when we keep trying to change the system from within the system itself for too long. That's why I think addiction is a really huge part of activist lifestyle, because it all becomes too much. And for me during that time, since I was maybe about 15, 16, I suffered from really debilitating endometriosis. And as I was going through my work in the feminist campaigning, it was just getting increasingly worse. And it got to the point where I was immobile. I needed a walking stick to get around because it had gone up through my spinal cord. And at the time, I remember my feminist rage was so much and so vast at this system, because I heard from all of the doctors that I was completely infertile. I would never be able to naturally conceive. This pain was going to be chronic. The best thing they could do was to be like just to manage my pain. And that made me so angry, because I was doing all the research that I could, like within the Western model. I was doing all the research I could about endometriosis, and we know nothing at this point about well, on a spiritual level, we know exactly what it is, but like in a Western model, they don't know shit about what endometriosis is. There's no cure for it. It was only discovered recently. And I was like, okay, wait, 10% of like more than 10% of people with cycles are experiencing these debilitating symptoms, and there's no cure. You have nothing for me except to manage my pain. What the fuck is that? Like that to me just seemed like such a disregard for the experiences of menstruating people. And that really fueled my rage. Oh, and then I was, moving through that for a while. And then eventually I got to the point where, just in kind of desperation, I suppose, I very cynically stumbled across cyclical living and menstrual cycle awareness. And at the time I wasn't bleeding. So I didn't think it would have any relevance for me. And I didn't really believe in like, oh, it just seems all a bit like hokey, because at the time I was very up in my head, very up in my over intellectualized mind about it all and trying to understand. But it was, the curiosity won over in the end, and I started learning more about my cycle. And, again, with my background in activism and philosophy, I started looking at it through a bigger lens, I suppose, and really getting into the soma and looking at all of my wounding and all of my resistance around this work. And I think after about a year and a half of really intentionally calling myself into my womb for a really long time every day, to make a really long and beautiful story short, my endometriosis is gone now. There's no evidence that I ever had it. I'm completely fertile, completely pain-free, and just cycling naturally, and using my body as birth control, and not going near hormonal birth control ever again. And it's my compass and my anchor and my guide. And that to me, in that moment, that was like, okay, what, like I'm sure that we all feel this way. Like I know so many people who like go from just like the first little glimpse of menstrual cycle awareness is just bliss. It's like, oh my goodness, this is a game changer. This is everything to me. I can't believe this. Oh my God. Followed immediately by rage of like, why the fuck was I not taught this earlier? What on earth? Exactly. Why is there? It's like immediately. It's like, oh, what? Like it's so quick. And and I've been working in menstrual cycle awareness ever since. And yeah, now we're here. But yeah, I haven't left my activist roots behind. And I suppose that really, it informs a lot of my work, is like looking at the cycle and embodiment of cyclical consciousness as a way to completely stand against a paradigm of patriarchal capitalism.
Yes, and yes, I can definitely feel your activist streaks there, and I love it. And yeah, for me, I usually refer to it as cycle awareness, because I don't want to say menstrual cycle awareness, because for me too, it's like there are, like, the world is made up of cycles. Nature lives in cycles. Healing works in cycles. Everything works in cycles.
Totally agree.
Projects work in cycles.
Yeah, this is why I always say like cyclical consciousness as opposed to linear consciousness.
Exactly.
It's like this is the embodiment of cyclical consciousness, because it's a way of seeing the world. I totally agree. Yeah.
That sounds beautiful. That's what I was reminded of when you said cyclical consciousness. That's the thing. Yeah. Wow. Yes, that is a long story. And for those of you listening or watching who are not quite sure what endometriosis is, I do have another video where I talk with a friend of mine who works with menstruating people who have endometriosis. So you can find all the information on there. And it's really, so as you say, so many have it, and it's tied to our rage. I wholeheartedly believe that. I am not diagnosed yet. I do experience extreme menstrual pain. And I know that part of that is connected to a deep-seated rage inside of me. Yeah, for me, it's interesting to hear other people's stories. And I love how for you it has been such an ongoing journey. For me, it wasn't like that kind of at all. I just kind of stumbled across this whole thing 5 years ago, 2017. But looking back at my childhood, I know that there has always been this curiosity in me about our psyche, our human psyche, and what people are motivated by, how they tick, how their mind works, and why so many say one thing and then just do the complete opposite. And although they are intelligent people, not working in line with the set values they have. And yeah, it's I remember that I had that as a child a lot, and then kind of the patriarchal conditioning just took over, that I must be the wrong one because I question what I see out there. As a Scorpio, it's like my truth-telling power is a given in my life. And from my current standpoint, I guess I've always just been a mirror for other people to reflect what wasn't working in their life. But neither did I understand it, nor were they willing to look at it, face it, and descend and change it.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I just came across a book on, it was called Goddess Wisdom. So it was more on the spiritual side, but it talked about the cycles and how women have been disconnected from their wounds and their bodies for so long. And as you say, the moment I read this, it was like, click, yes, this makes sense. And there is the rage. And ever since, I'm even more angry. And it could be that that was a point where my period pain became worse. True. So I do see the
really interesting.
And yeah, since then I had to quit my job. I couldn't stand how people were treated in the company I was working for, which was, after being more like a family, they suddenly started to implement these harsh hierarchical structures, and they started treating people as numbers and things versus as human beings. And then I switched to a feminist women's rights organization, where I thought, okay, here at least, like, my financial abilities, because I worked in finance, were put to a good use. And what I had to see was that we were about smashing the patriarchy in all these countries, because we were working with women who had experienced sexualized violence in regions of war and conflict. And we wanted to smash the patriarchy. Yet in our very own organization, we had patriarchal, hierarchical structures.
Yeah.
And I was like, this cannot be the way. We have to first look at what we do ourselves. That's where my what I said in the beginning, that I need to look at where do I hold these structures in my very own body. That's where I have to look first. And through a mental health crisis, I understood that I definitely need to work with people. And that's where I finally made this big leap and started bringing what I know, what I had learned, and all my life experience together to do the work I do today. So a different story with a similar outcome. And as you say, a sacred rage. Rage is a sacred thing, because rage, if used correctly as fuel and not to harm either someone else or yourself, it changes the world. What's your take on sacred rage?
Oh. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of fire and a lot of ferocity and rage. My take on it is it's a really deep rabbit hole, the rage thing, particularly for people who have been socialized as women. Like, mostly because we have no reference points for how to, first of all, know when we even are angry. Like, a lot of the time, like I've been reading about this recently, actually, in my, because sacred rage, the archetypal dark mother, inner autumn, it's, it's all very, very connected in the cycle, obviously. And like, a lot of people who are socialized as women, they'll say, oh, I'm really tired, or like, oh, this makes me really sad. What they actually mean is that I'm fucking angry. But it's not that they're lying. It's just we have no reference points for what anger feels like in our body, because by the time we're about 5 or 6 years old, we've already learned that our anger is not safe, and that our role in a room is to manage everyone else's emotions. So in terms of sacred rage, like, even accessing it is a fucking battlefield, because like we're just in the dark, and then once we name it, we're like, okay, oh, it's rage. This is rage that I'm feeling. And then you turn it all the way up. And then it's like, okay, well, how do I express this now? The only reference points for rage that I have are violence or aggression or hostility, and all of that's harmful. So it's like, what do we do with all of this energy, And for me, in my own, and I suppose my own opinion about that is that the only way for rage to go out without being harmful is for it to be completely unshamed. Is because the more shame that we hold around rage, first of all, the fact that we are experiencing rage at all, because we have a lot of ingrained and prescribed narratives from patriarchy around how wrong and bad and dangerous and horrible rage is, particularly as women. So like, yeah, like, getting to the point where we can actually feel the rage and letting go of the shame around the rage. And because it's the shame really that weighs it down. And I think that a lot of this pain that we feel, particularly in our premenstrual phase of our cycles, when so many of us experience extreme tension, PMS, by the way, that's a whole other conversation. I have so much to say about that. But when we're coming into the rage of premenstruation, a lot of the pain and the tension, for me, it's like, if rage and anger and volatility wants to come up and come out, it's the shame that's like pushing it down like that, and it's like vibrating here, and it wants to come out. But this exertion, it costs our body so much effort, and that to me is the source of quite a lot of pain. Is the shame wrapped on top of the rage. So when we can learn to distill it, then that's when it just can pour out, and then it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing when we can learn how to hold it with love.
I wholeheartedly agree. And what I like to say is that, like, as little girls, whatever the gender, but when socialized as girls, what we learn is that when we are angry, people will reject us, but when we cry, people will take us into their arms and soothe us. That's why, because I found that the one part of being so tired really fitting, and the part of being sad is because we've learned when we cry, people kind of soothe us.
Yeah. That's why we never say I'm angry, we say I'm sad.
And then for me, I
But
had to really pay attention to that. Like whenever whenever I'm crying, I'm asking, am I really sad and grieving, or am I fucking angry?
Yes.
Sometimes
Actually,
it's sadness, true,
yeah,
but
of course,
often it's anger.
Yeah, a lot of the time it's anger. And I think that's actually a really beautiful invitation to anyone watching this or listening to this in the future. Like, just take note for the next month. Anytime that you feel sadness, anytime that you're crying, ask yourself, is this grief or is it rage? And really, really dropping into the body and feeling what is true. Because grief, if it is grief, beautiful. But we can't just dress up rage as grief and pretend that we're sad when we're angry, because that can't be congruent, you know? And it's a fun experiment, really, just to see how much anger we're actually holding. And it's like, oh, that is anger. And then we start to learn, like, oh, this is what anger feels like, you know? It's not, because we can start to become more emotionally literate as well. It's really fun.
Yeah. Thank you for that invitation.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to turn our conversation towards is that we met because I put out a post on Instagram and I came out as spiritual and feminist. And you had such a beautiful comment that you typed under that. And it goes, the place where intersectional feminism and spirituality meet holds such wisdom and clarity, justice and healing. And I would love to hear more about that.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. And like, what a beautiful thing this has just sparked this whole connection. Like, yeah, no, I never would have seen that coming. I'm so glad that it resonated so much, because it's something that I'm really, really, really passionate about, is this intersection between like active activism, and I mean like actively doing activism, and spirituality, like where those places meet. The world, like, that's it for patriarchy in my mind. Like, when mystics and activists learn to actually talk to each other and communicate, like each has the missing piece of the other, you know? Because like the activists, we have the fire and the drive, like we will get it done and we will not quit until it's like, but we don't know how to chill. We have no chill whatsoever, right? So we end up like bashing our heads against the wall over and over and over again, because like activists are used to fighting, and we need people who are used to fighting, because there's so much that needs that fire, you know, but not ceaselessly and not like pointlessly. And the mystics have the remembrance, we have the knowing, we have this resonance with the wild feminine. We feel it in our bones, in our wombs, we see it in the moon, you know. But mystics, like, you know, if their path is to just kind of be drawn away and to just emanate love, like, power to you, that's beautiful, I love that. But there is a power in actually acknowledging, like, if I want to change the world, if I want to use my time here on this planet to make it more fair and more just for people who are like me, then we can't just like sit up and just be like, oh, it is what it is, you know? So when we combine the fire of activism with this remembering, with this knowing of mysticism, then it's like, well, that's it, you know, that's it, it's done. It's done. And yeah, for me, it's like there's healing and there's also justice. And I think that we need to have both. And I think that both come from each other, you know, because I don't think that we can really heal without justice. And that's not to say that we need an apology or we need things to change. Justice for me is a return to congruency, which is kind of touching on what you said around like, where am I holding these patterns internally? Where am I running these narratives myself, you know? Like, where am I holding on to the patriarchal consciousness in my own body? So justice is facing that part of ourselves, meeting it with tenderness, and then dissolving it so that we can come back to actualization and coming back into the truth of who we are underneath our like patriarchal narratives. So there's the justice aspect. And from that justice comes the healing, you know, because if we're not in congruency, then we can't really heal. If we're out of integrity with ourselves, then we can't soften. And without that softening, then we can't come into this stillness that is really needed for us to drop into a space of true restoration. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, and that's really, really deep. And apart from looking within and dismantling these structures that we hold inside. I think another part is to look at the outside world and the people that really get you angry or sad or whatever emotion you feel, and see where they are mirroring you something that you don't accept in yourself. Because of course I shared that I am a mirror for people, but likewise people are a mirror for me too, where I can learn to be more compassionate with myself. I will never forget when I saw a Black woman ask herself, where was the Trump in her? Because he was elected. And she said, well, if he got elected, there must be something of that in me as well. And that is so wise. And there is so much power in that. And as you say, it brings this inner softening, this being more compassionate with myself, but also being more compassionate with others. Because we are all in this together. We are all humans on this planet Earth. And it comes again this part of that you shared, like cyclical living is not just for us, it's for the whole planet.
I agree.
Because I believe once we like really connect to our body and how the body works, specifically uniquely for you, we start paying attention to, hey, what do I put into my body? Where does the food come from? Like, how is it grown? How is it produced and maybe manipulated through the processed? And then I believe that's how we start changing the world bit by bit, because we make different choices as consumers.
Definitely.
Choices that are also much more beneficial to the earth.
Yeah, for sure. And like not even just as consumers, but like as people with ideas, as people with philosophies and values and worldviews. Because a thing as well about like this justice piece of looking at where we've internalized patriarchy, it's not even just about our own sense of oneness and safety and compassion. Like that should be enough, that's like tick, yes, good, we should all definitely do that. But also there's the piece of like, for activists in particular, until we've done the work to deconstruct and dissolve our own internalized capitalist patriarchy, we are mouthpieces for capitalist patriarchy because it's the default. That's how it works. That's how a status quo keeps status quoing, like it doesn't need any effort.
No shame in that, no blame. We just say this because it's the fact.
Way we are. It's the way, it's the air we breathe, like it's what was that phrase? It's not the shark, it's the water. Patriarchy isn't the shark, patriarchy is the water. It's everywhere. So yes, there's this justice piece of coming back into congruency with self, but also until we have unpacked all of those voices in our own head, it doesn't matter what kind of activism we do, like eventually it's just going to lead back to feeding the system again. We're just going to come back to the same thing over and over because our values and our worldview is still incompatibility with the status quo. So we need a radical upheaval of all of our belief systems so that we can really be effective in our activism and sustainable as well and long term. Otherwise, it's just a band-aid for a bullet,
It is. That's what made me quit, because that
me too.
Organization didn't want to do the inner work. And there is always, like, when we want to smash something, there is always going to be a power vacuum. And if we don't have anything better in place, then we will just repeat.
Yes, 100%. And I think you and I spoke about this a little bit last time around like patriarchy being like a really abusive partner, and there were like 3 stages to leaving the abusive relationship, whereas like the first stage is you fawn and you make yourself into what they want you to be because that's how you receive love. So in the context of like us in a relationship with patriarchy, when we're fawning, we're we're doing all the status quo things, we're focusing on our like all of that toxic misogyny stuff. And then eventually we start getting really angry. And that's another thing you can do if you've got an abusive or manipulative partner, is you can fight and you can yell and you can demand and you can say, I will not be treated like this. I deserve better than this. I know who I am now, and fuck you for treating me like this. And we can yell until we're blue in the face. We can yell forever. But the thing about abusive partners is that the thing that they're not going to change. They're never going to change. And too many of us know that from being in relationships with abusive partners in the past. Too many of us know that they're never going to change. We can yell forever. And the third option is to leave. We can literally just leave patriarchy. That was for me the massive light bulb moment of like, oh, I don't have to actually like bring down this entire system myself. You can just exit and then invite as many people to come with you as possible.
Yes.
And that is where sexism came in for me. It's literally just like, bloop, gone. It's gone. It's not relevant to me anymore. And that's how we fight it sustainably.
That's why I call my movement a quiet revolution, because it's simply withdrawing from these systems until they have nothing to hold on to and they crumble. And because we've practiced living according to a different paradigm all along, we finally do have something better in place already. That is bottom up and not top down.
Yeah. And see, I think the thing about that as well is that we all know it on some level. You know, like we all have memories of these better ways of doing things. Like we all know that this is wrong, and we just kind of put up. And like I think if we're offered a different way, then it's just kind of easier because we're just slipping back into our natural essence, which is, you know, by its very nature, it takes less effort to be who you are. It takes way more effort to pretend to be something that you're not, particularly when the demands of that something that you're not is like 40 hours of work a week and like pretending to like things that you hate. And like, you know, it's exhausting doing that.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
You're
from the
so
bottom
welcome.
of my heart for everything that we have talked about. I think there are going to be more conversations, but for just now, if people would like to get in touch with you, learn more, know more about your work, where can they find you? What's your preferred way of being contacted?
Oh, beautiful. Well, I'm on Instagram a lot, at Rewilded Womb. I'll write that down for you if you like. It's just spelled as it sounds, really. And something else exciting that's happening at the moment, if it's okay that I chat about this for a second. Is that okay?
Please do.
Thanks, Lisa. With the Lunar New Year next year, which I think is January 22nd, I'm opening up a 6-month group container to start really exploring and devotionally reclaiming the menstrual cycle through a lens of archetypal reclamation. Because my whole body of work is that each phase of the menstrual cycle holds a unique transmission of the rewilded feminine, and our cycles, it goes so much deeper than like rest while you bleed, show up while you ovulate. Like each is a rite of passage, and each of these different archetypal expressions, they teach us who we are underneath our patriarchal conditioning, because we've got all the stories about what all these archetypes mean and how they're supposed to be, and that then feeds into our understanding of self. So yeah, looking at our cycles through this archetypal lens, it helps us to self-author and to actually come into our essence and figure out who we are underneath all of our wounding. And like that's what our cycles are for, on top of all the health benefits and all the everything. Like it's a gateway into self. So yeah, if anyone is desiring to learn about their cycles through an archetypal and deeply feminist lens, then yeah, they're more than welcome to come at the end of January. That would be beautiful.
I will definitely link to that below.
Cool. Sweet. Thank you, Lisa. What a lovely
Leila,
chat. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
Do you have some closing words maybe for our audience, or something that you would like to share right now that wants to come through? Doesn't have to be anything big.
Yes. What is wanting to come through right now is that it is always going to be revolutionary to prioritize the needs of your body. That's always going to be revolutionary. It can be really easy to get caught up in like massive big steps and huge spectacles of what we're going to give to the world and how we're going to change the system. But it's always going to spark a revolution when we prioritize the needs of our bodies. It can be as simple as that. And if we do that every day forever, then that's it. That's all we have to do.
Amen to that.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
holding space
much.
for this conversation. Yay.
Thank you so much for being
Uh,
here. I'm looking forward to further conversations in the future.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
Have a beautiful
Sweet.
day and speak to
You
all of you
too.
next time.